Hello, writers and crafters. I'm Valerie Isan,
I'm Eric Mertz.
and this is episode 48 of the podcast, and it's December 29th, 2021, as we record this. Our main topic is characterization today, but we have announcements and all that jazz first. What's up in your world?
Just getting some of those last, end of the year things done and off my desk. What about you?
Still at the bookstore. I've got half a week to be at the bookstore. Actually, what is today? Today is Wednesday. This is the last day of the crazy hours. So I'm going to be going to some friends. We've had our little COVID pod, just the people that we hang out with for the last 2 years. And they're all the same people. And we just feel safe with each other, and we're all vaccinated and boosted, and most of us all work from home. So we feel pretty comfortable being with each other. So our friends that live in Port Townsend have, been separated from us for a long time. And so whenever we decide to go on a trip, my husband will go to them and he'll get tested and, all that before he goes and isolate. And then we go. And that's what we're going to do for New Year's Eve. Usually we rent a house on the coast, but this time we're going to go to Port Townsend. I think I said this last week too.
I think you did too. And I'm still just as envious as I was a couple of weeks ago. I love Port Townsend.
I've only been there one time. I went there for their wedding.
Wow. Well,
so I'm going to go back.
It's a great place for an ordinary any day. So
yeah. Well, they've got a big house and they have an outbuilding where we can all crash in there. And so we're just going to be there for the New Year's and come back on Sunday, but we're leaving tomorrow.
Oh. And I don't think anything's so grand over here. I think maybe, cards and champagne, and I think Queer Eye comes on that day. So I probably will watch a few of those episodes. So much fun.
That's awesome. I love Queer Eye. In fact, we won't go there.
Absolutely. Hats off to those guys if they're listening.
Yay, we love Queer Eye. Okay, so let's see. I wanted to put another shout out on the Writercraft Writing Retreat and Workshop. This is the last week, if you're listening to this in real time, that the early bird pricing will be in effect. It goes up to the regular price on January 2nd. So we just have a few more days left. And again, it's 3 days, 3 nights, all lodging, all meals, 3 speakers, lots of retreat time on the grounds, coaching, yoga, reflexology, community, socially distanced. It's outside. Right now it's $680 for all that. And there's a monthly payment plan for $85 a month if you sign up in the next week. Otherwise, it goes up to the regular price of $840.
Are you reading anything good right now?
I'm reading The Sentence by Louise Erdrich. I never can pronounce her last name.
I'm not familiar.
She's a Pulitzer Prize winning author, and she actually owns a bookstore in Minnesota.
Cool.
And this story takes place in Louise's bookstore. She's just a very minor character, but it's not autobiographical at all. It's other than her name and being in the bookstore. But yeah, it's a ghost story. So
interesting.
I'm really interested in that, and it's told by the perspective of a Native person. So it's really interesting. I'm enjoying it. I still have Seed to Dust, Mark Hamer still in my bag. I still pull him out, but it's beautiful nature writing, and sometimes I just want to dive into a story and get lost there. So So I'm kind of reading both of them at the same time.
That feeling.
And David Sedaris is by the bedside table.
Did you see where he announced it took him 18 years to get his first book out? It was at least that's been a meme going around in the writing community. So he had talked about from the genesis of his first book to the publication of his first book. That was his 18 years.
No, I didn't know that.
Pretty remarkable. Yeah.
Cool. All right. One last Patreon little boost here. This podcast is sponsored by our patrons at patreon.com/Valerie Isan. For as low as $1 a month, you can get a shout out on the podcast and we can make announcements for you. And at other tiers, the benefits increase: free books, accountability Zoom calls, scene analysis, mastermind calls, and even free Writercraft retreat tickets. Become a patron of the arts at patreon.com/Valerie Isan. All right, let's get into the meat of it.
Character.
So characters are vital to our stories. I don't know about you, but I start usually my stories with a character. That's what gets the juices going. And there's usually a character that comes to me and tells me they want to tell a story, or I'm going out and saying, all right, who wants to tell me their story? And then somebody will say, me. How do you get
something similar too? I feel like there's, I get that what if proposition in my head. What if this situation, the story situation, I play the what if game, but that's quickly married to a character, right? It takes the character to make that what if proposition fun or intriguing or fantastic. And yeah, I agree. Going out there, seeing what characters raising their hand is a very early part of that process.
They also have to be really memorable too. We really want, when you think about story and like Harry Potter or Star Wars, you can't have Star Wars without Luke Skywalker or
right.
Anne of Green Gables. Oh my God. You're a dude, so maybe you haven't read that, but I've
had my share of Anne. I've read it and watched it, and
she might be my favorite heroine of all time. Although I really do dig Elizabeth Bennet. Yes. People have been writing about her and making movies about her and for like 200 years. So, right. And she's still around. So we want to create characters that are like that, where people are still talking about them and thinking about them and creating worlds for them 200 years later. That's my goal.
Yeah, anyway. That's the gold standard right there. And we'll talk about it later, but I always think of, when I think of great character, I always think of the Wizard of Oz and Dorothy and the cast of characters in that story, because they're distinct and they're clear and their motivations are all very, very obvious and you couldn't mistake them. But we'll talk about that later.
They have a lot of archetypes, I think, in that movie.
Oh, absolutely.
That story.
Absolutely. So let's talk about where that, so we're talking about there's a range of characterization and how it works in a story. And most writers, ourselves included, probably every writer, they don't start out with that excellent developed character, right? So in the beginning, like in those raw phases, right, we're talking about characters that are a bit less defined. And as authors on a first draft, that might be what writers are looking at, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that would look like maybe your characters aren't distinctive. Maybe they're unlikable even, or unrelatable. I know there have been, for instance, when I was writing the current novel that's on sabbatical at the moment, but that one that hasn't been published yet, I took it to my alpha readers and nobody liked the main character because she was kind of a wimp and just let stuff happen to her. And that was not how I wanted her to be portrayed. So I had to rewrite her backstory. So that would be a case of an underdeveloped character. She's just not likable. And also I have had a hard time making voice distinctive between characters in the same novel. So that's another, I guess, red flag. If your characters are underdeveloped, they all kind of sound the same.
Right. If you remove the dialogue tags and you can't tell who's speaking, there's a big red flag to me. That's one of the tests that I put things through in a first draft. Is I'll remove the tags, read the dialogue, and if I can understand who's speaking, and then I know I've at least reached that standard of distinct. But boy, that first draft, that can be really difficult. Characters are talking, they're finding their voice instead of having a clear one already.
Yes, I would say exactly the same. And that is irritating as a reader and makes them fall out of the story. if they're reading and they get lost and they can't see who's talking anymore. And you
Right.
have to stop the story and go back and like find a dialogue tag or something that indicates, okay, I totally know who's talking here, and then have to like ping pong back and forth and see. Yeah, I don't like
Right.
doing that. And I have to do that in quite a few stories. So that's kind of a drag.
Yeah.
We don't want our readers to have to pull out of the story. That's our
Not at all.
main goal. Yeah, keep them there and under hypnosis for as long as possible.
Right. That's a good way of putting it. Under hypnosis, I feel like the story propels you. You're turning pages, and you're not conscious of. You're not conscious. You're deep in there, and that comes from the characters guiding you. That's a good standard.
So in order to make that rough draft characterization better, I mean, I don't know if you struggle with that or not. I mean, what do you do on subsequent drafts that try to improve the characterization? You said you gave the example of taking out the dialogue tags and seeing who's talking.
Well, yeah, I think there's three things that I think of off the top of my head that I do. One is I listen to the beta readers or my writers group. I think sometimes we have a tendency to be stubborn or proud and think, well, they just don't understand it. Or I think to dismiss the advice you're getting is a big trap, and you don't want to fall into that. But one of the first things I do is I just play the what does this character want? What does that character want in the scene? If those things aren't distinct or clear, then I have to rewrite the sort of the core motivation of the scene. I mean, the two characters interacting, or the character interacting with themselves, there needs to be some opposition there, and that opposition should bring out the character.
The
So I kind of,
conflict, yeah, for
yeah,
sure.
yeah. So sometimes I'll find myself, you'll have two police officers talking, and they're both trying to solve the case, and they're both, of like mind, and that doesn't make for very compelling character. Doesn't let either character pop off the page. So I look for ways to just create even the slightest opposition so that the character motivation has to come through. And then the last thing I'll do, if I still feel like the character's not coming through, is I'll find an action, something that character can be doing in that scene that shows who they are. If they're nervous, then maybe they're doing their nervous tick. If they're feeling confident, they're doing their confident thing.
Do you
And
know what that is before you write your novel? Like, or do those ticks and behavioralisms like come out as you're writing?
that's a good question. I think that, I'm in book two. I'm in draft two of book two in a series with a main character, and I'm discovering those little things, but I'm discovering them, one, because the series is new, and two, because he's delving into something deeper, and so therefore his mannerisms are changing. So I'm
Mhm.
able to discover them. But because I know him to an extent, I know that there's what the baseline for him is going to be. I know within a range what those character things are going to be. He's not the kind of guy that's going to go out and do, he's not going to go out and race his car. That's not in his personality. But he might be the kind of person that picks up, a rifle, a hunting rifle, and going out and, target shooting, something like that. So I think what you need to know is the range within your character, and what you have at your disposal. If they're not a drinker, you don't just go stick them at the bar to give them something to do. They don't, give them a pack of cigarettes if they're not a smoker. It's so you have to know that range. In a short story that you're developing with a character you've never written before, you have some freedom, right? Because this is maybe a one shot, and you have some more room to play. But in a series, I think you have to be as mindful of who are they, what's possible.
I also think to piggyback on the range part that you're talking about, in terms of the emotional range of the character, which also helps that character become more real on the page for the reader, because we know they have that story arc, and they have to change throughout the book or series and series.
Right. Both.
Knowing at the beginning of the story what your character's flaw is. I'm using that term it's from Libby Hawker's book, Take Off Your Pants.
Mm-hmm.
So once you decide on what that character flaw is, then naturally how they will be at the end of the story, because the flaw will die. There won't be that flaw anymore. And that's what's going to help them, show that character arc. So knowing that before you start writing your novel, I think is good, because then you will know the range emotionally, which will also affect their behavioralisms and their choices throughout the story, and contributes to the plot too. So I think that's a really great way to build character at the beginning of your book too, is knowing what flaw they will need to kill off by the end. I'm using that a strange word, maybe not kill off, but they have to change. So what is the range going into your story? For instance, now I'm blanking on a well, let's talk Wizard of Oz then. So at the beginning of the story, let's say
Dorothy lands in Oz, and
I know, I'm just trying to pick a character with the flaw. Like I was going through like the
Tin
Scarecrow,
Man, the Cowardly Lion, and
the Cowardly Lion. Okay, so let's use the lion. Yeah. So at the beginning, he's terrified of everything.
Right.
And at
his
the
own
end,
shadow, his own tail, every bit.
And then at the end, he's not that way. So throughout the story, you have to show him changing, and you do that through their tics, their behaviorisms, their speech patterns.
Right.
Yeah. So I think that also contributes to building character and making them
and you
realistic.
you depict the characters kind of slaying the dragon within, and then they face the dragon on the outside, and they slay the dragon there. And I think that's and that's a character development. And that's always why I like the Wizard of Oz, is because all of the character flaws for those people that Dorothy picks up on the road is they're also clear, and they're all internal flaws that have an external climax, and that's critical. And I think you can't mistake those characters from one another in the story, because those tics and flaws are so obvious. So, and it doesn't have to be that standard. I think of a great character that it doesn't have to be that clear, I guess. And because I think of a character like Walter White from Breaking Bad. In the beginning of that show, in the first season of that show, you don't know that he is consumed by, the kind of petty jealousy and the kind of egomania. We watch his flaw develop and come out through that series. So you have, the character doesn't have to step onto stage with that, that flaw, broadcast. You can watch them learn that flaw, overcome that flaw in the same story too.
Yeah, ultimately, I think we need to create large enough characters that are distinct enough in all their mannerisms and actions and personal history that we can root for them, or against, I guess, even the villains. They have to be real enough that we want to root against them. And the kinds of books that I like to read, the stories I love the best, are the ones where I, again, like see myself in the story, or I fall in, or I'm like fully immersed. The kind that gets you turning pages and you don't know how long you're reading into the night. Those are the kinds of books that I want to write, because those are the books that I want to read. So yeah, having a character that readers can root for, think about afterwards. Sometimes I remember being at work and thinking about the characters in the book, wondering what they were doing in the book I was reading. Like, that's the kind of character I want to write.
Right. And that's deliberate. I mean, you have to have intention. Like you said, you have to know those things in your head, or have an idea about them before going in. Those things don't create themselves. Often I'll read, early manuscripts from authors, and I'll see, you'll see that character sort of the character work being done throughout Act 1, and then maybe in Act 2, and then by Act 3 you can tell that they have an idea of that character, and that I think that happens to all of us in some way. That process of rewriting becomes about, okay, the character starts to really get moving here. You have to move some of that character development early on, because a reader, like you said, isn't going to, ponder that character while the book is in their bag, unless that character is compelling early on, right?
Yeah. And I don't, I've never done this before, but depending on what genre you write, it might be interesting if you did an exercise, when you're doing character development, and think about those characters that people become raving fans of, like when Harry Potter movies would come out, people would show up in full regalia.
Right.
They would be in costume and show up for the opening night at midnight, to watch the next Harry Potter movie. Or, yeah, the Comic-Cons and cosplay, and, who are the characters that create that, like, not frenzy, but kind of.
No, that is a frenzy. Yeah, I don't think there's
And
any other way to
what is
describe
it
it. Harry
about
Potter.
those characters that makes people want to be them? And how can we write those characters?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I wouldn't pretend to have an answer, the clear answer. I don't think anybody
Ditto.
has that clear answer. I think that answer really comes from, I think it's understanding what I think it's understanding what's universal, and trying to find a new way to tell that universal story, because Harry Potter he is a new character in some ways, but he's also an old character, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's the one, the chosen one. He's brought into a world unexpected, and he is forced to navigate it. And that's a story that's Luke Skywalker, that's Neo from Matrix,
Mm-hmm.
that's a million other characters. I think it's understanding that archetypes are archetypes, and finding which ones you identify with, and then making that person real, and not being afraid of archetypes. I think young authors, and I think probably older authors too, there's some trepidation you go into when you're looking at archetypes, because you do know these things have been done before. You have to recognize that those things have been done before, but if you trust your instinct to take what's been done before and do it in a new way, I think you have the formula for reaching that readership, and then them dressing up like your character at Comic-Con.
Making t-shirts and mugs and
Oh yeah, always think
merch.
of the story of the family that drove like 400 miles to get a Harry Potter book, and then everybody drove back, and they took turns reading it to each other because they couldn't wait till they got home.
That's
And
awesome.
I just, you can. That is a familiar story. That story's been done many times, but clearly something about it works. So don't be shy with archetype, right? Don't be shy with this person fits this familiar role.
So we're almost out of time, but I kind of feel like we should go into the weeds just a teeny bit, and
Uh-oh.
branch out a little bit on, like, what point of view is, are you going to write in first person? Is your character going to be close to you? I think that's also part of the characterization. Yes, you've got a character, but how do you want to portray him on the page? Is it going to be written in first person? Is it going to be written in third person? How are you going to describe that character without, gone are the days of those long flowery descriptions of, she had long blonde hair, and you can't really have your character like look in the mirror and describe themselves. That's too
Right.
passe, like, how are you going to describe them? Those are also things to think about when you're writing characters.
Right. Yeah, it is. And I think there's that first person, third person close. I mean, however you want to define the different relationships in third person. That's a crucial choice. And I don't know how you feel about. I have a hard time writing in the first person. I just have always felt a little uncomfortable there, because I like that I like that ability of to describe the character with some objectivity.
Hmm.
And like you said, without the mirror, that's really hard to say. I looked at myself in the mirror and admired my long curly. That's
I
hard.
noticed the freckle on my,
Right.
no, no noticing.
Right, you
That
can't notice
totally
yourself.
pulls you out of the story as a reader.
Do you have are you comfortable writing in first person for yourself?
Yeah, in fact, strangely, none of the novels I have written ended up in first person. They ended up third. I write memoir, so that's always in first
Right,
person.
it better be.
So either I get it out of my system writing memoir, so when I write fiction, it's easier to slip into third. But having historically first person has always been way easier because it's more like, I don't know, method acting or something. You know
Mm,
what I mean? I can really embody the emotions and get that out there and kind of like become the character, and then writing in first person is easy. But there's so many limitations with writing in first person, like physical description, like you have to be in every single, or the eye has to be in every single scene. If you're writing in first person, you can't know something that's behind the door, you know, so it depends on your genre.
right,
If you're writing YA, a first person is not industry standard, but it's frequent, you know.
right.
Right. YA and first person go together really well. Um, so yeah, I think it kind of depends on what genre you're writing.
Yeah, I guess
And
that makes sense. I think of it, I write mystery, I write that type of discovery genre, and it's really hard to, yeah, because you can't describe what's behind the door. You can't give you It's harder to give the reader that anticipation of what's coming through another point of view. And I like that feeling of playing with that. But still, um, I love that close third person point of view. I like that really cozy, not, without the omniscient feel of that
mhm.
sometimes third person can have, but just being close with that person. It gets you almost inside their, that reflective eye, with some perspective on it. I think it's, to me, that close third person is easier to show a character flaw with. It's easier to use and show a character flaw than the eye would be. And I've experimented with eye, and it it's harder for me to get that well-roundedness. But there's a challenge. Maybe.
I think that the story also determines what point of view you write in. You know,
Right.
if it, because first person is tends to be raw or more raw and intense. And sometimes kind of like in present tense, you know, everybody tends to, the standard is to write in past tense, but
Right.
every once in a while you'll get something that's written in present tense, and that is way more immediate, and but it's hard to stay in that same,
Intensity.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's hard to stay there. As a reader too, it's hard to read with the same intensity. Of course, want emotional tone and the dips and valleys, and you want that to change. Even when I'm
Right.
watching a movie, like I don't like the kinds of movies where you're holding on to the edge of the chair for 2 hours straight. Like that's
Right.
exhausting. I want there to be this scene where everything is going crazy, and then I want the lull, and then I want the crazy again, and then I want the lull, just so I can breathe naturally through the story.
Right. Yeah. I like that too. That action reflection
Hmm.
build to a climax that integrates both of those elements of the story rather than, yeah. I agree. I think then that is, an early stage writer, necessity is to sit down when you're thinking of your story and your character, deciding how do I, now you have to be in the I because you're writing it, unless you're
Hmm.
writing in a team, but how do I put that character, what's the right way to tell that story?
Hmm.
And that's a challenge. And sometimes I'm I've seen it and I've done it where the rewrite is to change that focal point, you know. So
Me too.
I have written a few things in the eye that I've gone back and rewritten as a third person story, and that's hard, but ultimately, like, knowing that, getting that instinct for what a story should be early on is beneficial.
Yeah. And that just takes practice and more books.
That takes practice. Practice, practice, practice.
All right. That feels like a natural conclusion. Is there anything else you want to say about characterization, building character, composite characters?
We could probably talk about this for days, but the confines of podcast land are not days. But no,
true.
I think it's something to explore. It's something to keep thinking about all the time. And look at the characters that do what you said, like the book that is in your bag while you're working. What are the books that keep, and the stories that keep you thinking about that character? What do they do? And really master those tricks.
Yeah. Awesome. Great talking with you, Eric.
Yeah, absolutely. Great talking to you, Val.
We'll see you next time.
See you next time. Yeah, have a great time in Port Townsend.
Thank you. Bye now.
Bye-bye.